Help support the show by going to the Amazon.com search bar on footballsamerica.com when doing your online shopping. There are no charges to you, just support, and it will take you right back to the Amazon website. This month, Football's America podcast listeners will get free shipping on any order over $35 when they go to footballsamerica.com/Amazon. Again, that's footballsamerica.com/Amazon.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Football is America with Ron and Kyle. I'm Ron.
And I am Kyle. And today we are joined by Brandon Gowton, manager, editor, super king for Bleeding Green Nation, which is the Eagles SB Nation blog and team page. Brandon is here today to discuss the Eagles with us, and we are very appreciative of that. Brandon, thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. And I like the super king title. I'm definitely adding that in.
Oh, yeah, man. I like to go ahead and start giving out titles randomly. I have no power, but let's do it. I like it. Let's talk a little bit about you first before we get into the team, because as a super king, the peasantry doesn't get much chance to grovel at your feet, as they should. So let's let them know a little bit about you. How long have you been a fan of the team?
Well, I would say, going back to... It all first started about in 2004. I'm 23, so it all started about in 2004 when the Eagles just happened to get this wide receiver. You might have heard of him. His name was Terrell Owens. He's kind of a popular guy. Kind of made some waves in Philly. Kind of a big deal. But the T.O. era is what really had me hooked. And then from there, it's kind of been funny because it was kind of growing up as a fan, and now it's more transitioning into media member. So now it's more objective and, try to get more of a level-headed approach, I would say.
And what exactly did drive you to be a professional? Thank you for that transition you just softballed in there for me.
Really just, I really had fun writing about the team. And really just looking for something to do. It was back when I was in school, and I was kind of, I was finishing up school, and I was kind of like, all right, what do I want to do with my life? I kind of like writing for fun, but I really wasn't necessarily thinking about it as more of a career or something I did seriously. But I gave it a shot. I started writing for BGN and like the fan section, and eventually that just led up to me getting called up to the front page because the writers on the front page really liked my work, and they thought I was capable enough of moving up to the big leagues, and that's where I am now.
It was a pretty quick transition then. I mean, you're only 23 and already the editor. That definitely shows some writing chops right there.
Yeah, I would say so. If you say so, I agree.
Youngest super king in all of SB Nation. Last personal-ish kind of question. Strongest memory of the team, good, bad, otherwise. Personal memory, you're at a bar with friends, whatever. Strongest memory of the team.
I mean, the one has to be just Deshaun Jackson returning that punt against the Giants in 2010. I mean, that was just a crazy day. I mean, I was at a family party that day because it was around Christmas time, and had the Eagles game on, and they're kind of, they're struggling. They're getting down against the Giants, and then it was late in the game, and they're down, I guess, I forget how many points, but they were down multiple scores. And, I'm driving on the way home, and I hear on the radio that they're kind of making a comeback. And I'm like, all right, maybe they have a shot, probably still a long shot. But then I finally get home, and I turn on the TV, and it's a tie game, or it's about a tie game. And they punt to Deshaun Jackson. And I'm like, oh man. And then, he that punt lands and it doesn't go out of bounds. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he's going to return this. And then a seam opens up, and I'm like, he's going to return this. And then he's just running down the field, no one around him. There's a big block from Jason Avant on the Giants long snapper. And I was just, I couldn't even believe it. That was like easily the best sports moment I've ever watched live.
Pretty sure that you aged Tom Coughlin about 15 years in those 30 seconds of play. Whenever I talk to an Eagles fan, this is one of the plays that they bring up for the more recent memories. A lot of people seem to forget, though, that Michael Vick was outstanding in that game.
Yeah, he was phenomenal. I mean, just that game is Michael Vick in a nutshell, because early in the game, bad turnovers, bad decisions, just really kind of almost took the team out of the game. But if there's one guy who can bring a team back into a game that they're completely out of, it's Michael Vick, because he's just so insane. And some of the moves he put on Giants defenders in there, he'd have like a rusher coming at him on his blind side, and he'd just spin out of it and just take off down the field for like 20 yards. Just insane. I mean, when Michael Vick was on, and that's why I think it's such a funny thing, the way he went out in Philadelphia, no one's really sad to see him go, and there's a lot of good reason for that because of the turnovers and just a lot of struggles, and but things like that, it's so hard to say he was a bad player, because you look back at memories like that, and he was just an amazing player.
Wasn't the Giants punter for that game, wasn't he released like the next day?
I don't think he was. I think they kept him into the summer, but Tom Coughlin ran out on the field right after the game and got up in his face. I mean, man, that had to be just a terrible situation like that.
Yeah,
4 days later, he was released, actually.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah.
So,
He didn't even make it to the next week.
Well, then that's how you destroy a team. When you beat a team so bad that somebody gets fired, I mean, that's definitely impressive. That is worth. And the Eagles always have their crazy comeback wins against the Giants. It's always the Giants. I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't know what that is, but
I'm sure you'll let it continue with a smile on your face, because it's really, really funny.
Sure.
So let's take a look at the 2014 season before we get into all the other fun stuff that we obviously have to talk about. After winning 5 of 6 to start the season and heading into the bye week, the Eagles looked poised to finally kind of take that next step, and to be completely honest, nearly did with a 10-6 record. Impressively at that, considering the injuries that they sustained at the QB position and especially the offensive line. But the 3-game losing streak at the end of the season, 2 of which being to division opponents and more importantly to the Cowboys, ended up grounding them, killing the playoff hopes. It's a tough way to end the season, especially with such high expectations. But what was your opinion of last season? Would you consider it a success? And if not, can you point out the small successes that found their way to the forefront of the fans in your mind?
Yeah, it's a good way to frame it. I think, you look back at that collapse, and there are a lot of reasons that things went wrong. I mean, the secondary is the most pressing issue for people. They were just giving up big plays to Des Bryant and Deshaun Jackson. They couldn't defend anyone, and they couldn't defend the pass. They were just getting shredded. But at the same time, for as much as the defense was struggling, the offense wasn't putting them in a good position at all, because the Eagles were leading the NFL in turnovers. Mark Sanchez threw, 10 interceptions. Nick Foles was leading the NFL in turnovers before he got hurt. So, I mean, as much as you want to blame the secondary, and they deserves a lot of blame, turnovers were a big issue. So when you ask if the team improved, they really didn't from that standpoint, because they went from Nick Foles throwing 2 interceptions in his second season in 2013 to leading the NFL in turnovers in 2014. And the offense really kind of just took a step back as a whole. People are wondering, is Chip Kelly's offense figured out? Or then, other people are just saying, all right, the offensive line was too hurt to really do anything, because even LaShawn McCoy didn't really have his best season despite finishing 3rd in rushing yards. He was something like 24th in yards per carry. So, you asked me about progress. I think the defense, despite the secondary looking awful, the front 7, that unit is really solid, and I think they're building on that, and that took a step forward. But the offense kind of took a step back. So as a whole, it's hard to say, because you factor in the special teams too, and they were easily the best special teams unit in the league, and they could repeat that again. So overall, I don't know if they really took a step forward, as they just advanced another year.
So in a way, kind of some stagnation, small things to be proud of, but not taking a leap forward, but at the same time, not really regressing in the grand scheme.
Right. And to the point where I think that set up this offseason, which is why they were so active and why they made these moves, because they saw they were at a point where they weren't going to be able to advance much further with what they had, that Chip Kelly felt he needed to make changes.
Hey, Ron, just out of curiosity, how did your team end up faring in that turnover game?
I believe we were second worst in turnovers or something like that, all the way up.
Yeah.
I think we led all the way up until like week 17, and then somebody, I can't remember who, had gotten enough turnovers. I think it was Blake Bortles had committed enough turnovers that made it so that we were no longer the worst in turnovers.
And who is we?
Thank you, Kyle. I appreciate that.
That is, I'm just putting this in here, Brandon, just so you guys know, it could be worse. You could have Jay Cutler.
Yeah.
So, perspective thus gained. Let us press onward. Let's talk a little bit about Chip Kelly. You and I briefly touched on this before we got going. A lot of people are drinking the Kool-Aid on this guy. A lot of people have bought in completely into the Chip Kelly way of doing things. In Chip we trust. And it seems like that's happened very quickly with relatively little he's done to earn it. He's had good records, but nothing has truly been game changing in the same way that we were expecting, out of his Oregon offense. What is the true view from the fans in terms of Chip Kelly support?
I think you have to look at Chip Kelly in two different lights at this point where he is, because you have Chip Kelly, the head coach, and I think that guy has earned a lot of credibility with the fans because he has taken this team to 20 wins in 2 years. Last year he became like only the second head coach ever to come straight out of college and win the division. The first was Barry Switzer, and he did that with the Cowboys team that had won the Super Bowl the year before, or 2 Super Bowls the year before. So, I mean, he obviously took over a good team. Chip Kelly took over an Eagles team that was 4-12 under Andy Reid and just really showed no signs of life. So for him to make that big jump in the first year from 4-12 to 10-6 alone was impressive. And then to go 10-6 again last year, while also somehow leading the NFL in turnovers and having terrible quarterback play, I think people are looking at it in that light where he hasn't really had his quarterback yet. He didn't draft Nick Foles. He brought Michael Vick back, but that was kind of because they didn't have a lot of great options. Mark Sanchez, obviously a backup option. So he hasn't really had his guy, and despite this, they've won 20 games. I think a lot of people would say, that's pretty impressive because, he hasn't had his guy, and that's now transitioning to the other light people should evaluate Chip Kelly in is Chip Kelly, the GM, because earlier this offseason, he received complete control over the team's player personnel department, moving former general manager Howie Roseman out of that area. And that area is where Chip Kelly is pretty untested because, this isn't an area where he necessarily has a lot of experience in because he's a coach. He's not necessarily an executive. So, do we know if he's making moves where he kind of knows how to evaluate properly and when it comes to making trades or signing contracts? That area is pretty untested, and that's where I think a lot of people still have questions about Chip Kelly.
Fantastic answer, because that is essentially the only correct way of looking at the guy. He does seem to be very competent as a head coach. Obviously 10-6, 2 years in a row, you're doing something right. And there's going to be struggles, as you said, until you get your quarterback, you don't have anything. And Nick Foles obviously regressed a little bit. A lot of issues to concern a head coach there, but on the GM side of things, he seems to be kind of shooting from the hip, and this is yet to be determined whether or not it's going to be a successful strategy. Definitely has a lot of fans concerned, though. At this point, is he kind of getting a pass in the fans' mind because he's done so well as a head coach, or is there general concern and malaise over the fact there's nothing that can be done about these decisions? I mean, where is the fan reaction right now for him as a GM?
I think most are in wait and see mode because it's been such a crazy offseason. I mean, LaShawn McCoy is gone. Nick Foles is gone. Trent Cole, veterans, Todd Hermans, those guys are gone. They brought in DeMarco Murray, brought in Ryan Matthews. There's been so much change. And the draft is still obviously yet to come, and I think that's going to be a big factor for people in terms of how they view him, depending what happens in the draft. I really think it is wait and see. I think right now most people are ready to give him the benefit of the doubt because of what he has been able to do. But at the same time, I think there's a smaller group of people who are pretty concerned, but I don't think that's the majority right now. I think that's more of a minority view.
The way he's making a lot of the trades, there's a lot of very quick, aggressive moves, which definitely gets him what he wants, but sometimes the trades aren't necessarily favorable, or you could rationalize that he does not get the value in the trades that he possibly should. Do you think this is incorrect perception? Is this other GMs with more executive experience taking advantage of the new guy? Or is he actually believing he's getting the better end of the deal? I mean, what is going on with some of these moves that just don't seem to line up?
Yeah, I think you can make an argument for that. At the same time, maybe, I think let's just take the LeSean McCoy trade, for example. That a rusher is turning 27, has a fair bit of mileage on him. He has, I think, over 600 more career touches than DeMarco Murray has, who's was actually 1 year older than LeSean McCoy. They get Kiko Alonso for him, who's coming off a serious injury, but very talented player in his rookie year, defensive rookie of the year by one of those outlets. So, you look at a deal like that and you're like, all right, that makes some sense. Maybe not the best value. I don't know. Even I think Malcolm Jenkins went on NFL Network and said the team was kind of surprised that they didn't get a draft pick as well. So, maybe you can argue things like that. But in the big picture, to this point, I don't think there's been anything fundamentally wrong that could come. I don't think to this point I think to this point you can kind of nitpick at things, but I don't think you can say enough to be like, wow, this guy's going to be a failure. And
the reason we wanted some of the your perspective is because we just see so much outrage over some of the moves, and then we hear a lot of the Chip Kelly's playing fantasy football and he doesn't have any idea what he's doing. We hear that on ESPN and all the other fun networks and stuff all the time. We have our own concerns, but they're not nearly as magnified, I guess, as everybody else. But one thing that I did want to bring up is that you have a writer, Mark, is it Saltveit? Saltveit. And I've actually been talking to him because he emailed me back when I had sent the email out that he is writing a book on Chip Kelly.
His second book, yes. He's already written one, yeah.
Oh, he didn't even tell me that. See, he just told me he was writing a book. So yeah. Can you give us a little bit about what exactly he does in there, just real quick? I know he's just a writer, but what kind of writer is he? And can you kind of give us a little bit about what his first book was?
Certainly not a super king.
Yeah, Mark is not a super king, but he is the super king when it comes to Chip Kelly knowledge. I mean, this is a guy who Mark isn't really an Eagles fan, or hasn't been an Eagles fan until the Eagles really hired Chip Kelly, because he's been more of a Chip Kelly follower. He followed him at Oregon. Mark actually lives in Portland, so he's not local to Philadelphia by any means. But he's really embraced the team now that Chip Kelly has been the head coach. And in his book, I think the book was actually more written before Chip Kelly had become the head coach. And, I haven't read the whole thing yet. I still have to get around to that. But basically, it's a lot of the philosophy behind what Chip Kelly is, who he is, what he stands for. Because there's not a lot of great publicly available information on Chip Kelly. He's really a private guy. He often declines one-on-one interviews, so people that get them, they're really rare. Mark has tried to interview him, hasn't worked out. So it's just an interesting look at an interesting guy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We've actually got to get to some of these personnel moves, because I don't know if you know, but there happened to be a few that the Eagles made. So I'm not sure if you're tracking any of these, but I thought we would get to at least a couple of these. And the one that I wanted to start with is Jeremy Maclin leaving the team. Mm-hmm. That makes 2 years in a row that the top wide receiver has left the team. Kind of seemed to take a page from the Joe Flacco book and bet on himself in a contract year, and it worked out for him even. He had career highs in receptions, yards, and touchdowns. So it seemed, even though the Eagles valued him, they just couldn't justify the price tag on a guy that hasn't been the healthiest. So what are your thoughts on his departure? And what do you think his success will be in Kansas City back with Andy Reid?
Yeah, I think the Eagles definitely did want Jeremy Maclin back. You mentioned that, this is the second year they're losing their top wide receiver. Definitely different situation from when, they just straight up released DeSean Jackson for nothing. I think Jeremy Maclin was, the team loved him, teammates loved him. I think they wanted him back. It's just that Andy Reid, was willing to overpay because the Chiefs are so, I almost said Chiefs. The Chiefs are so desperate at wide receiver. I mean, I think we all know the stat that they didn't have a wide receiver even score a touchdown last year. So they're obviously very desperate. And I just think they were that came into play there where they just simply offered more money. And I don't think the Eagles, I just don't think Chip Kelly wants to pour that much money into the wide receiver position. I think Maclin is a very good player. I don't think he's necessarily an elite player, and that's why I don't think they wanted to pay him elite money.
Yeah, you can definitely say the Chiefs. Seth would agree with you that they definitely need to start paying their players better. We talked at length when I had him on about the Justin Houston thing, but Kyle and I also had kind of the same thought when it came to Jeremy Maclin, is that he's a great number 2 or an outstanding slot guy, but he's not a number 1 wide receiver. It's just not.
It's easy to see letting him go when you see the money he got elsewhere. When you look at it from that perspective, it makes total sense.
And the last thought I have is, with him gone now, I mean, you have Cooper there and Matthews. Who is going to be the go-to receiver? I mean, who is going to be the guy who's the big guy, the possession guy? I mean, I know you've got Ertz and you've got Selleck there. Those are 2 big guys at tight end, but who is going to be the number 1 guy that's going to be targeted? Because let's be honest, we haven't really seen the full potential of the offense yet.
Yeah, that's the big question too. I think you have to look at Jordan Matthews just because of his productive rookie season. He was really good for the Eagles in the slot. Apparently the team is open to moving him to the outside position, so that would seem to say that he's potentially getting more snaps on the field and getting more time and maybe targeted more often than he was. Nick Foles didn't really target him as much as Mark Sanchez did in the second half of the season. I wonder whoever the Eagles quarterback will be. I'm sure that's something we'll talk about later, but I'm wondering whoever it will be looking for him the way Sanchez did last year. So I think Matthews definitely is the safe bet. Then you have a guy like Josh Huff, who they drafted in the 3rd round last year. Made a lot of mistakes in his rookie year, but the team is really high on him still. There's a report from Jimmy Kempski of Philly Voice that the team actually likes Huff more than Matthews when it comes to upside and potential and things like that. And that's not a slight on Matthews at all, because they're also very high in him. But it's really those 2 guys who you're really looking at, because you can't count on Riley Cooper. You can't really count on Miles Austin. And there's good wide receivers in this draft class, but it's really hard for me to say at this point, that they're going to be able to count on a rookie.
Man, I forgot completely that they had picked up Miles Austin, and because he's a journeyman at that. But I call him
he's still alive.
Let's go on to the LaShawn McCoy trade, and they bring in Kiko Alonso. Not only that, but they do end up snagging DeMarco Murray and Ryan Matthews. I remember sitting at my desk doing an episode, putting the outline together, putting the dispatch together. When the news came through, my phone starts buzzing like crazy. The trade was shocking, not to mention it completely killed my show plan for that week. McCoy had been a fan favorite. The value just does not seem to be matching up for fans like it does for analysts and writers like ourselves. On top of that, the Eagles snag Murray, which was a great grab, but after paying him and Matthews, the contract benefits don't really add up. Can you give us some insight? What was the true motivation, in your opinion, for all of this?
Yeah, I definitely don't think it was just one thing. I don't think McCoy was Chip Kelly's favorite player off the field. I don't really have a ton of evidence to support that, but I just think, you look at some of the things that McCoy has done in the past. There's been some incidents. There's an incident where I think he threw like a woman off of a party bus on the turnpike or something. Other things like that. But I don't think that was the main thing. I think the main thing, when you look at Chip Kelly said it's the money. It wasn't all about the money, but that was obviously significant because you look at how much he was set to be paid, and he was set to be paid as the highest running back, only behind Adrian Peterson, his contract situation is kind of up in the air, depending on what the Vikings do. But McCoy was obviously, he didn't really have a great year, as I said earlier in the show. And it seems weird to say, since he did finish 3rd in rushing. But, you look at the yards per attempt, they were 24th, kind of just average. You look at some of the more quote unquote advanced metrics, going here by Pro Football Focus. He only averaged 2.09 yards after first contact this season. And that's a career low for him. You look at LaShawn McCoy, and this is a guy who makes people miss. He just wasn't making people miss last year. And even when he had the opportunities, because the run blocking was not great, there were times where he was getting tackled in the backfield before he ever had a chance. The PFF has a stat called elusive rating, which kind of tries to boil down a runner's success beyond the point of being helped by his blockers. And in that area, McCoy finished 15th out of 18 running backs who had played at least 50% of the snaps. And you look at previous years, he was like 6th, 7th. So, he just didn't look like the same runner. And those stats kind of match what you saw on the field. I think, this wasn't a guy who looked anything close to the form he was in 2013 when he led the league in rushing. I think Chip Kelly wanted a more physical one-cut runner. That's kind of been the buzzword since McCoy's departure and the signing of a guy like Murray and Matthews. But I think there's truth to it.
And the injury concerns with Matthews, is there any steam to that? Are fans concerned? Are you concerned? I mean, we've seen has had a lot of problems with staying healthy. So, what kind of significant value does he bring, considering that specific part of his career?
Well, Matthews and Murray too. Just Murray coming off, the big year in Dallas, and even before that, he was a guy who's been injury prone. So you look at both of those guys, and those are definite concerns when it comes to injuries and staying healthy. But I think the what maybe give you some optimism about that situation is, the Eagles are not only supposed to have one of the best sports science programs in the league, but just because of you have two of those guys instead of one, instead of relying just on one of those guys, as kind of the Chargers had been doing a little bit with Ryan Matthews at one point, and then as the Cowboys were doing more so with Murray, you look at, if one of those guys goes down, you're not totally doomed because you still have another guy there. And then Darren Sproles is also in the mix, and I would imagine the Eagles even keep a fourth running back, maybe Chris Polk, who's been okay in limited touches. So I think that the thinking there is between their sports science program, which they believe in, will it work out? We'll see. And just the idea of rotating these guys will make sure they're not getting worn down and beat up. It will work. I don't know, but I think there's at least it's a better strategy than just signing Murray alone and really just banking on that guy.
You brought up Darren Sproles, and that's somebody that kind of fades into obscurity there, and it's unfortunate because he's a great player, and it's one of the more exciting players to watch. Do you think his role is going to stay the exact same? Is he still going to be kind of that swing back special teamer that he's been?
Yeah, I think he kind of sees more of a similar role. Chip Kelly kind of said they might use him in a more expanded role. I don't really believe that. I think he's going to be the punt returner, which he's still very dangerous at. Obviously made the Pro Bowl because of that last year. He had a great year when it came to being a punt returner. And as I said earlier in the show, Eagles special teams were just dominant. When it comes to using him in offense, I don't really see him getting too many touches, but maybe more so as a receiver. Maybe there is some more snaps for him in that area, just because we talked about how thin the Eagles receiving position is. They don't have a lot of quality options. Maybe the thinking is they try to get him more involved in that way. I don't know.
All right, so we got to keep rolling here. Kiko Alonso, you bringing him in with the trade as well. Is he coming in to replace a Trent Cole? What is his role going to actually be? Kyle is a Colts fan, so the Cole acquisition for his team is still fresh, but I know him, and he's just kind of waiting for it all to turn stale, especially when it comes to defense.
Mm-hmm.
Was it a good move for the Eagles? And if you don't mind, could you kind of tell us if it was a good move for the Colts as well? Because Kyle would like to know.
I'll start with the Colts, since I think Trent Cole has been a great player for the Eagles, very underrated. He was one of the longest tenured players, along with Todd Herremans, who is also now a Colt just by chance. And Trent Cole's a guy who he's going to give it every snap. That's cliche, but it's very true. He's maximum effort player, not quite the pass rusher he used to be just because of age, but definitely still a very good run defender. I definitely think he belongs on the field still, and I have nothing but good things to say about Trent Cole. Total team guy, just a very good player. The Eagles wanted to bring him back. Again, it just came down to a money situation where he was due a lot. I forget how much. I think upwards of $10 million this year, and he just wasn't worth that much. So it kind of came to this money again. But if we want to talk about Kiko Alonso, that's a guy who is definitely if healthy, which is a big assumption because he's coming off a bad injury and he has an injury history, but if he is healthy, I mean, that's a guy who's just a playmaker at the inside position. And this is a guy who he can really cover. I mean, that's what I think the Eagles got him for, because you look back to some of their later games in the season, and for as much struggle as they had covering outside wide receivers, getting burnt, as I said, by Des Bryant and Deshaun Jackson, you looked early in that second Dallas game the Eagles had, and they were really vulnerable in the middle of the field against Jason Witten. They just did not have an answer to cover him. And I think, you get a guy like Kiko Alonso now, and that solves a lot of problems in the middle of the field. And from there, I think, the Eagles in that game specifically, I think they kind of, from that point on where Witten was cheating or Witten was getting open, I think they kind of cheated their coverage to make sure he wasn't getting open, but leaving more guys vulnerable on the outside. I think now you bring in Alonso, he kind of strengthens the inside so your outside guys don't have to be burdened as much.
And Fletcher Cox is also another contention point there, along with Kiko coming in. You got a fifth-year option you have to exercise on him as well. So to kind of seal up that whole linebacking core before you start making your moves in the draft, you wrote a pretty good article on this about his contract still hanging out there. Is this something they are going to wait on and see, going towards the draft? And if they can't get what they need, they're just going to kind of exercise the option on the last day that they possibly can. I think you said May 3rd is the last day they can do that.
Yeah, I think they would love to get a long-term extension done with Fletcher Cox, and I don't think it's any question that it will get done, almost just because that they're going to do what it takes to keep this guy. I mean, Fletcher Cox is only 24. I mean, that blows my mind. He's been in the league 3 years now. Very talented player. This is a guy who he's so athletic given his size, 6'4", over 300. He can rush the passer. He can blow up blocks in the run game. I mean, he's pretty much everything they love. They love him so much. I mean, this deal is going to get done. I'm really no concerns about that at all.
Which position at linebacker do you feel that they need the most help then? Is it pass rushing on one side or the other? Is it middle linebacker? I mean, they kind of seem to have pieces put together all over there, especially with, Brandon Graham and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But what piece of the linebacking core do they really need help on? Because I keep hearing that they still are going to need help at linebacker, and I just don't understand why.
Well, I think they're kind of set on the inside because you have Kiko Alonso, you have Michael Kendricks, who his name has kind of come up in trade rumors, but there's really nothing official there, so we'll see. They brought D'Amico Ryans back through next season, so he'll presumably still be around. So they're set on the inside for now. You look at the outside, I mean, they signed Brandon Graham to they re-signed him because he was, obviously they drafted him and he hit free agency, and it looked like they might lose him, but they kept him, and they gave Connor Barwin kind of not an extension so much, but they kind of just gave him a raise. They kind of restructured his contract in a way where they're giving him more money. So they're kind of set on the outside too, but behind Barwin and Graham is the real question mark, because they took Marcus Smith in the first round last year, and Eagles fans are pretty down on him because he couldn't even get in the field really at all, despite being a first-round pick. So the depth there is a big question mark. I don't think just because they took Smith in the first round last year is going to prevent them, if they have the opportunity to draft a pass rusher this year on the outside, to take one again this year.
Yeah, depth has been kind of the talking point that I hear all over the defense with the Eagles, especially, for example, when we talk about Byron Maxwell. A lot of big money went his way, considering the lack of talent, or at least knowing what you truly have in the defensive backfield with the losses of Nate Allen and Kerry Williams, and the addition of, let's classify him as injury-prone, Walter Thurman. We'll get to all those guys in a second. They have a bit of work to do to sum up that defensive backfield. You brought it up earlier that they had a lot of issues with that. The concern for Maxwell, though, is that there is always a substantial drop-off for players once they leave Seattle, especially defensive players. Couple questions here. Do you think he will be able to play at as high of a level as he did when he was in Seattle? And is he also worth the $63 million, 25 guaranteed that he got?
Well, to the first question, I think it's kind of a double-edged sword when you look at the Seattle thing, especially with him, because on one hand, you can say that, yes, he was in Seattle. He definitely benefited from being surrounded by so many talented players, especially with Earl Thomas lined up behind him. And he's obviously a great cover safety, and kind of, if you get beat, he kind of can erase that. But at the same time, you have to think that when you're playing Seattle, you're not throwing at Richard Sherman. So you're throwing at Byron Maxwell. And he was targeted a lot, Maxwell. So he had a fair share of targets, and I think he held up pretty well. And I think he was tested. This isn't like a Nnamdi Asomugha situation when the Eagles signed him a couple years ago, where the Raiders were so bad that he was clearly their best corner, so teams just wouldn't throw at him because the other cornerback was always worse. That's not the situation here. Maxwell was definitely tested, so I think you can argue that there's a good chance that he does hold up because there's evidence of him doing that. When it comes to, what was your second point again? I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all right. Just, is he worth all that money? The $63 million, 25 guaranteed. It just seemed like so much money to give to a corner. I mean, when you look at some of the top corners in the league, Revis and Sherman and Patrick Peterson, and these guys don't have money like that. I mean, well, Revis does, but you look at some of these other guys, and some of them, I guess, are still on their rookie deals. But that's just a lot of money.
It is a lot of money, and no, I don't think it's going to be hard for him to be worth that much, just because that is a lot of money, and it's going to be hard. But the only thing I can say about that is the Eagles were almost forced in a position like that because they cut Kerry Williams, and he wasn't really a great option, and Bradley Fletcher was gone, and clearly they couldn't rely on him to be a starter. So they were almost in a position where they really had to overpay or have nothing at cornerback, because that's pretty much, he's the only guaranteed starter right now, and he was proven to be a starter. But, opposite of him now, you mentioned Walter Thurmond earlier. It's possible he's a starter. It's possible Nolan Carroll is a starter. It's possible they give Brandon Boykin a chance, but really no proven option. So they were so thin at cornerback, they almost just had to give someone money, and they had the cap space to work with. I don't think it's an awesome contract, but I think in 2 or 3 years they can kind of get out of it. So if he can just be at least an average starter until then, I don't think it'll hurt them too much.
Yeah, the depth that they have there, it's just unknown. There's a lot of unknown. We talk all the time with people about what their thoughts are on the unknown players and who their breakouts are going to be. But, I mean, here we've seen some of, like you said, Brandon Boykin and stuff, and nothing has jumped out to me that says this is a guy that could take over and take the next step. But let's shift to the other side of the ball real quick. Reports of them shopping Evan Mathis. All right, they have a lot of issues all over the place when it comes to offensive line, especially injury-wise, and logic seems to dictate that they would want to get healthy and maintain, but it seems as though with them letting Herremans go, which is a move I supported, but then they're also shopping Mathis, plus you add the quotient of Jason Peters also not being able to stay healthy, and kind of at this point we're starting to worry there. You're seeing change not only at the high-end skill positions, but also at the bookends as well. What is the real story here, and what would the risk versus reward be of trading Mathis?
Yeah, I think with Mathis, the situation is that they don't necessarily just want to get rid of him as much as it's complicated, because last year Mathis kind of came up with, at least according to reports, he kind of approached the team about getting a raise, and I don't think the Eagles are really eager to pay a 33-year-old offensive lineman who is projected to be the oldest starting guard in the league this year. They're really not ready to hand over a bunch of money to a guy who is already under contract at a value they feel comfortable with. I just don't think it really sets a great precedent to kind of just shred his deal and start a new one, especially that age. So it's a tough situation. But I think you see these rumors because they've given Drew Rosenhaus, who's his agent, permission to seek a trade. And I think if there's a deal that comes along where the Eagles get good value, I think then he's gone. But I don't really think at this point, just because he's still around and there's been rumors for a while now, that they're really eager to move on. Maybe that changes depending what they do in the draft. Maybe they draft an offensive lineman high and that makes Mathis more expendable. But at the same time, other teams might be drafting guards at that point and they might not be willing to part with something. So, at this point, it almost seems like Mathis is going to be back, but definitely still something to watch here.
It would not be the worst thing to get a trade for him. My initial reaction was kind of negative, and then looking at this more and more, it's a lot like the Patriots trading, Logan Mankins to Tampa Bay. Initially, everybody hated that, and then it started to play out very well. So a lot of teams in the league would do anything to get a veteran who knows their business on the line and would overpay. So if you can get that extra for it, like you said, you can draft in the early rounds and get a replacement, maybe not to the same Pro Bowl caliber, but certainly competent.
Let's go on to the quarterback position and all the moves that were made there. The trade that sent Nick Foles to St. Louis and then brought Sam Bradford to Philly, Kyle and I have kind of a running joke when it comes to to Sam Bradford. And I know I know better than to diss Eagles and Phillies and Flyers fans, to especially a man that loves his city, but Bradford wasn't an Eagle yet, so we feel like we have a little bit more time before we can, really settle in and say that, well, now we can't make fun of him to the guy who writes about him. But let's get our jabs into Sam Bradford while we can. We kind of refer to him as the owner of the Always Injured Hotel, which is managed by Jake Locker, frequented by Brian Balaga, and has a no Sean Marino stateroom. So we have a lot to say about it. I know Kyle, this is one of Kyle's favorite topics, so I'll kind of concede to him after making my horrible joke, but there you go.
Was that your horrible joke?
It was. Thank you, Kyle. Go ahead.
I'm just surprised because usually your jokes are so bad that I'll stop you in the middle of it and be like, what you're doing is wrong. All right. We're going to be on trial for this crap. So you're improving. It was just not funny as opposed to outright awful. That's great.
Thanks.
I love, Brandon, that you guys had on your website that poll, worst trade in Eagles history. Nobody seems to be getting behind this. When Ron initially told me about the trade, I was driving home or whatever I was doing. I wasn't at a spot where I could read the details for myself. And I was shocked until he had told me, oh, well, the Eagles also got a first-round pick. We're like, that's great. That would have made this okay, I think. But when you send a fourth this year, a second next year, for Sam Bradford, and a fifth, and also Nick Foles, who some reports indicated he wanted out anyway, and he's happy to be in St. Louis, and I'm sure they're happy to have him. Sam Bradford is there. The thing that blows my mind is people were talking about how a lot of teams wanted to trade a first rounder for this guy and how he's going to fit the offense perfectly. And I want to know, how is this a good deal knowing Sam Bradford's going to be injured? Because because, well, it moves out of the realm of speculation and into fact when the past 2 years is like, hey, you going to play this year? Sit here. It's fine.
I mean, it's when you frame it like that, I mean, there's definitely just not a very encouraging deal. I think people have warmed up on it since, just because I think, that's just the nature of fans in any way. But I also think because of these reports that the Browns were actually the team who offered a first rounder, and I think it was the number 19th overall pick for Bradford, and the only reason the Rams supposedly didn't do that is because they wanted a quarterback back, which makes sense because if they get that 19th pick, they don't necessarily, and then they trade Bradford, they really don't have a quarterback option, and the draft class isn't really the best when it comes to quarterbacks. So I can buy that a little bit. And if that's the case, I think you can argue that at least the Eagles had some kind of reasonable value for trading for him in theory, because if there's a team willing to give up a first round pick and all they have to give up really is a second round pick, because even if Bradford does get injured, in your assumption, there's protection on that pick next year. Like if he gets hurt and doesn't play at all, the Eagles get their third round back. So it's really not so much they're giving away a pick as they are kind of just swapping the order, like one round. I really don't think that's the worst risk you can take if you just don't have a quarterback. And I think the Eagles are in such a tough position, and were in such a tough position rather, before getting Bradford, because they had Nick Foles. I think it was clear that Nick Foles could be a successful quarterback. But the problem with Nick Foles is that if things around him started to go wrong, like they did in 2014, offensive line injuries and things like that, he isn't the guy who's going to be able to carry the team. Now, is Bradford that guy? I don't know. But I do know that if Bradford is healthy, which is a huge if, but if he is, And we talked about sports science, or I talked about sports science a little earlier. If the Eagles really believe they can keep him healthy, I don't think there's question that he's actually more talented from a physical standpoint. And I think that's what Chip Kelly is banking on.
Definitely seems to be a huge risk, but one that the team went all in on. So that's definitely got some people at the very least reserved in judgment, because nobody wants to come out and trash the trade only for it to end up working out well. Now, one thing you did say there, the Eagles are in a very difficult position, but with the way trades and, the draft is starting to line up, all of a sudden there's this very real possibility that Chip Kelly ends up looking like a genius on this one. Ron had told me a few weeks back, I was talking with him, I just can't understand this. This is crackerjack GM work right here. And he said, well, what happens when Mariota falls to 20? And and the thing is, it's starting to look very possible. When you look at the teams who really need a quarterback picking before the Eagles, you can say, well, Tampa Bay will get Jameis Winston. Tennessee's probably not going to get Mariota with the number 2 overall. He doesn't really fit Ken Wisenhunt's style. The Jets got Fitzpatrick in a trade. The Texans have Ryan Mallett, and they want to kick the tires on him, and I don't think they really are going to want to bring Marcus Mariota in to be the guy to compete in the AFC South with the understanding he would carry the team. I don't think he's there. There's a very real chance that Mariota drops the Eagles at 20. And if so, we all got to fall down and acknowledge the genius that is Chip Kelly at that moment. Is this something that I'm guessing the Eagles fans would be all in favor of if he's there at 20, picking him up?
Yeah, absolutely. Just because, this is the guy all off season that Chip Kelly has been praising. I mean, Chip Kelly said, Chip Kelly appeared on before the national championship game between Ohio State and Oregon and said, Marcus Mariota, he thinks like Peyton Manning. Like this is the guy he compared to Peyton Manning. This is the guy who Chip Kelly reportedly said that Marcus Mariota will win multiple Super Bowls in the NFL. I think, you look at, I was talking about earlier that Chip Kelly didn't really have his guy in his first 2 years. I mean, this is Chip Kelly's guy. So for fans to be able to see Chip Kelly get his guy, I think they're absolutely in favor of that. And I think there is some possibility that he falls to 20, as crazy as it might seem. You look back just the last year. I mean, I thought Teddy Bridgewater was going to be at least a top 15 pick. He falls to the bottom of the first round. Johnny Manziel, different player, different issues. But again, I thought that guy was going at least top 15. And these guys are falling into the late 20s. So I don't think it's impossible at all.
And definitely a sort of thing where when you have the coach who's bringing his unique system and you get that quarterback to run it, you have to assume that the transition that a rookie quarterback goes through is going to be less running the exact same offense or one incredibly similar. There would definitely be that hope that the transition is going to be a little smoother and you aren't going to end up with the standard rookie mistakes. Now, if it does come down to it and there's the opportunity to trade up to get him, would you say that most fans are willing for that, depending on price? Some people just hate trading up no matter what. Some people, I'm sure, don't even want Mariota because that's how fans are. If the team trades up, where is the limit? At what point is the price too high for Marcus Mariota?
I think it depends on who you ask, for sure. I think, you look at Mariota, and I think there's a number of the people who support the trade would say there's almost no price too high just because quarterback is really what matters in the NFL. You either have one or you don't. And then, the Eagles do have Sam Bradford, but he's just such an injury risk, as you said, and just he's only on a 1-year contract. Even if he plays well, you're going to have to re-sign him to a big deal, probably, in the future, and that's not necessarily an ideal situation. So I definitely think Mariota is still coveted by not only by fans, but the team. I think when you're getting too high, for some people, what they would argue is if you're opening more holes on a roster that isn't necessarily just perfectly set, or you're giving up these multiple picks that could fill those holes in future years. The only problem I see with that is, there's never going to be an NFL roster without holes in it. And if there is one, if there is a roster that has a hole at quarterback, then that's what matters the most. So I think in the end, you have to get your guy.
And is there a certain price limit where you'd say, all right, trading this year, next year, the year after, all 3 first-round picks to move up to, say, number 2 overall? Is that at the point where it becomes too high? I mean, where is the actual line in terms? Well, is there one, at least in your mind, in terms of picks? And let's just deal with first and second rounders. It gets way too speculative if you go beyond that. Could you give us, at least for your personal opinion, where you think the value becomes far too much? Or, I mean, even if you say, well, 10 first rounders is too much, all right, that's ludicrous, but, where is your personal line?
Yeah, in theory, for me, again, it's almost just to the point where there isn't a price too high, and I don't think it will necessarily require that much, because we talked about him falling to 20. I don't know if that'll happen, but I think it's possible he could fall within a range where trading up maybe only cost, this year, which really isn't even, you're not even really factoring that in, because that's just a pick swap at that point. And then maybe like a future first next year, and, maybe this year's second or something like that. And I think, that's reasonable. If Chip Kelly really believes this guy can win multiple Super Bowls, let alone one, I mean, there's almost just no price that's too high to pay, because that's what it's all about. It's all about getting that guy, and it's all about pairing him with Chip Kelly, because, I mean, you don't know what's going to be available in future years. If Sam Bradford doesn't work out, then you're kind of stuck, and you don't have a second round draft pick you're going to lose your second round pick next year. And again, you're just in a tough position where you don't have an easy answer at quarterback. And even if Sam Bradford does struggle, I think the team, as it's constructed right now, is almost too talented just to completely bottom out and get, a really high pick. So if you're relying on that and the team just bottoming out and getting a high pick and drafting a quarterback, then, I don't know if that's really an answer either, because Chip Kelly is about to enter the 3rd year of his 5-year contract. If he doesn't have an answer on the roster going into the 4th year of his deal, I mean, that's just not looking good for his prospects.
Now, talking about the longevity of Chip Kelly, playing the hypothetical scenario game, let's say he gets Marcus Mariota, and Mariota struggles terribly, is wildly unsuccessful, maybe has a Robert Griffin sort of thing where 1 year is great, and then after that, it's very, very difficult to see anything positive. If Marcus Mariota fails, and keeping in mind he is Chip Kelly's guy, will that spell the end of Chip Kelly in Philadelphia?
Yeah, it would. And that actually just goes for, I think, any head coach that takes a quarterback and bottoms out. I think that's why we're talking about the possibility of Marcus Mariota falling to 20, is because I think some of these guys are scared to take a chance on a guy like that, because if you take him and he doesn't work out, that's going to be your job right there. I mean, if it doesn't work out, you're gone. If it works out, yeah, you look like a genius and you're probably staying around for a long time. But I think that's why some of these quarterbacks get passed on, because, if you kind of almost don't address the position, well, you have to address the position in some way, but if you don't stick your neck out there and take a guy like that high, and you don't make that risk, well, maybe you can bide a little bit more time, because you can just say, oh, well, we haven't had the chance to get our guy yet. But if you do go out there, and that's no exception if Chip Kelly does it, if he gets Marcus Mariota or any quarterback, and, if he ties his wagon to any quarterback and it doesn't work out long term, yeah, then that's his job.
So let's stick with the draft thing just a little bit longer. We actually are going to be running short on time here, so I'm going to have to kind of shove this through the hole as fast as we can. You did a great article on the team needs for Philadelphia when it comes to the draft, and it was actually, I think it was back before the free agency thing really happened. The positions of need that you have are corner and probably safety now. Linebacker seems to be sewed up pretty well, so we don't have to really do that. But the interior offensive lineman still has some issues there. Kind of give us where you think they are going to go in the draft. What is going to be their primary concern? What will be their next concern? In the first 2 rounds, how do you see them kind of attacking the positions that they really need to sew up?
I definitely think we see offensive line in one of the first 2 rounds, just because I think this team wants to get back to the run game. You see that with the signing of Murray and Matthews. I think they really want to get back to the run game being strong, because that's why they were so good in 2013. They led the league in rushing. So I think that's going to be a priority. They need a guard. And not only do they need a guard, but they need a future tackle potentially. So I think the thinking is you get a guard now, you have him play there. Then when Jason Peters retires, you can kind of kick this guard out to right tackle and then move Lane Johnson, who's currently playing right tackle, over to left tackle. So you kind of get one of those things going on. And then the other position, when it comes to looking at the future, is cornerback, because we talked about it earlier, and I won't get into this one too long just because we already talked about it. But you have Byron Maxwell, but you don't really know who's going to be across from him. And all the guys right now who are under contract are only under contract for this year, such as Boykin, Carroll, and Thurman. So there's really no future answer there. And the last position I have to address is safety, because they literally do not have a starting safety next to Malcolm Jenkins right now. There isn't one, and there isn't a clear option. There's guys who are there's names at that position. You have a guy like Earl Wolf, but he has injury concerns. You have some special teams guys who could be in the mix. And then you have guys like Ed Reynolds and Jerome Copeland, who are just totally unproven in the NFL. So that you kind of have to look at safety too as just a huge need right now.
Now, there's definitely a lot of needs that can be addressed in the draft. And with the draft still ahead of us, it's way too early to ask, but we have to get your take on it anyway. Let's talk next year and the chances the team has. Looking ahead, there's definitely, as you said, the expectation to start finding the answer at quarterback. There's a lot that needs to happen. In a lot of ways, it's going to be a defining year for Chip Kelly. Where do you see the team finishing up the 2015 season?
I think when you look at the NFC East, I don't think it's a juggernaut by any means. I don't think the Giants are a huge threat to the Eagles. I think Washington, they always play the Eagles tough, it seems, but I don't really think they're a good team yet at all by any means, because their quarterback situation is completely unsolved with RG3. And, Dallas obviously had a great year last year, 12-4, but they lost Murray, and that was a huge part of their success. And so is their offensive line and their run blocking. But, until they have a running back who can prove that he can be effective as Murray and play like he did, I think that's a big question mark for them as well. So I think the NFC East is pretty open. I think the Eagles could easily finish in first again, like they did last year in 2013. Or 2 years ago now, but yeah, I think it's open for them. But you said it. I mean, we have the draft to come. It's just so hard to place where this team is going to be. I think they have good potential, because I think it all comes down to the running game, as I just said, and getting that back on track. If they can get that run game going, I think it could easily be the best in the NFL. And we saw with the Cowboys how valuable that was last year, because a lot of people didn't think the Cowboys were going to be that good by any means, but they had a top run game, and that really carried them all the way. I think the Eagles are kind of trying to copy off of that.
With the overall expectations of next year, we're looking at the schedule, and you have a seemingly not horrible schedule. I mean, the teams aren't going to be real easy. They're not going to be too super hard, but you have a decently difficult schedule at home, a little bit easier on the road outside of New England. You have New Orleans, Tampa Bay, Buffalo, Miami, Arizona at home. Now, Tampa Bay, and we can speculate all we want about that because we don't really know what's going on there yet. Buffalo's a tough defense. Miami's going to be a tough defense now. Arizona's definitely got a tough defense. New Orleans, that you get to play them at home, and they're traditionally horrible on the road, so you're looking at something kind of a good situation there. With Atlanta, Carolina, New England, the Jets, and Detroit on the road, you're looking at a record here that could be 6-10 or 10-6. Now, I tend to lean towards the higher, closer probably to 12 wins because of what Chip Kelly has done. I tend to be a little bit more optimistic about his overall personnel moves and the strategy that he's taking. When you're looking at final record, and I know that it's really early, but just looking at that schedule, are there teams there that really worry you outside of New England because they're, reigning Super Bowl champs, but outside of them, who are the teams that really concern you when it comes to the Eagles next year?
Well, yeah, we have to start with New England just because I think that's going to be I just have this feeling that that's going to be the opening game, and it's going to be in New England, the defending Super Bowl champ. So I think that's going to be a tough start right out of the gate, and I think that'll be a good test to see, all right, did these changes matter? Did Chip Kelly make the right moves? What's this team going to be like? I think that if they can beat the Patriots at home in the opening game, I think that's going to be, a big tell in the season. But you look at these other opponents, nothing too concerning here, I would say right now. The Detroit Lions made the playoffs and they had a good defense last year, but then they lost Sue. Arizona Cardinals have been a problem for the Eagles the past 2 years. Even though they beat them in 2013, they always play tough. Miami Dolphins should be interesting because that's Bill Lazor, Chip Kelly's former quarterback coach in 2013 when Nick Foles had that great season. So you look at teams like that, nothing else there that really kind of makes you shake in your boots at all by any means. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle that.
Well, at this point, we are definitely hitting right up against the clock. So let's turn the floor over to you. Let's have you plug your Twitter, your website, anything you've got, anything you think that we did not cover that we need to. Now is your time. Yeah,
obviously you want to check my work out at bleedinggreennation.com. You can also follow me on Twitter. That's at Brandon Gowton, BrandonGowton. You can also follow Bleeding Green Nation's Twitter at Bleeding Green. You can listen to Bleeding Green Nation's podcast, which is BGN Radio. You can find us on iTunes or at libertybroadcast.co. I think that's about it.
Any authors or any articles, anything upcoming that we should know about that people should be looking for or kind of scrounging around to find?
I wouldn't say anything too specific. Obviously we're going to have a lot of good draft coverage on the site coming up, so you definitely want to stay tuned for that. Something might be in the works that I've done in the past and a bunch of Eagles writers have done in the past. We haven't finalized it for this year yet, but be out on the lookout for it. It's called the Eagles Almanac, just a collection of Eagles writers, not only from BGN, but just a bunch of outlets. So definitely keep an eye out for that if in the future months. We haven't officially decided on that, but something to watch out for.
All right. Well, hey, thank you, Brandon, so much for coming on. It's been a long interview. We normally don't go this long. Once again, that's Brandon Gowton for Bleeding Green Nation, Eagles blogging team page on SB Nation. And thank you so much. Stay on with us after we get done here, and we'll kind of lead you out, okay?
Sure thing.
Once again, that was Brandon Gowton, manager, editor-in-chief, super king of Bleeding Green Nation. I think he was a little bit more than amused with his new title that I have bestowed on him. And it was a lot of fun getting to talk Eagles, especially after all these trades. I think he was maybe playing it a little close to the vest, which is to be expected, but a lot of fun talking to him.
Yeah, it was a great time. I am very excited to have him back on again, being the guy who runs the whole website. We're going to have a lot of great things to talk about, especially after the draft. He knows a lot about Chip Kelly, and I can't wait to talk to his other writer as well about the book he's writing about Chip Kelly. And a situation, I think, there that he kind of is in an unknown era. Like with Andy Reid, you kind of always knew what you got. Now with Chip Kelly, everything's kind of just up in the air, and I think that's a tough thing to write about.
You're in that weird position where half the people are going, the sky is falling, and the other people are saying the streets are paved with gold. Like, there's not a lot of in between. It's not every day that your quarterback is the manager of the always injured hotel, but that is the case that the Eagles find themselves in right now. It's not a big concern because that place is backup quarterback heaven. I mean, you get your Kevin Kolb, your Michael Vick, your Nick Foles, even Mark Sanchez had a little bit of a career revival there, going from backup to replacement for the injured starter. So one way or another, due to voodoo magic, I'm sure they'll be fine. But they are a team that everybody is going to intently be watching this upcoming year.
Well, I think it's also just make or break for Chip Kelly. If this all blows up in his face, it'll be really hard for him to find an NFL coaching job in the capacity that he's had right now with the Eagles. And if he ends up being incredibly successful, there's going to be a lot of coaches that are going to be demanding kind of the same treatment. I wouldn't be surprised at this point if this goes really, really well. He kind of sets a trend.
Well, it's going to be a lot like Brandon said. Years 1 and 2, you're figuring some things out. At the end of year 3, there needs to be some very clear direction going forward. So that is going to be what I am looking for from the Eagles throughout this year. That and also possible hilarity. We are going to be taking bets as to when you think his knees will explode or his shoulder will detach or any other number of injuries. So go ahead and shoot us an email. Let us know when you think he is going to be injured.
And we're not wishing injury upon anybody. We're just asking when you think it's going to happen. We think that Sam Bradford is a great quarterback. We do. When healthy, he's outstanding. But the fact remains that he can't stay healthy. I mean, it just can't happen.
Outstanding.
He's going to be outstanding in this offense. He will. If he stays healthy, he will be outstanding in this offense with DeMarco Murray behind him as well. It's going to
The only outstanding he's going to be is he's going to be outstanding by the bench.
Well, I mean, like, that's what we're trying to say here is we're not wishing injury. We don't hope that he gets injured. Will it be funny if he does? Only in the sense that it happened and we told you so.
Just say yes. Yes, it will be.
Well, I don't want people to think that we hate Sam Bradford. We don't.
No, we don't. They know why would we hate him? What is there to hate? He's injured all the time. How do you hate on that? That's just funny.
That's funny because it's not funny that somebody got hurt.
It's
funny about
because
the situation.
He collected $62 million to sit on his ass for 4 years or something like that.
Yeah, I guess if I was him, I'd be laughing too in my bathtub full of money.
Yeah, exactly. He's going out there with Scrooge McDuckian levels of wealth and doing absolutely nothing for it.
Yeah, that's true. All right, well, hey, we're gonna wrap up. So thank you to all of the Eagles fans that have joined us to listen to Brandon talk from Bleeding Green Nation. And if you have a chance, go ahead and check out our show. FootballsAmerica.com is our website. Our Twitter is at FBIA Podcast. You can also email us at ron@footballisamerica.com or Kyle, Keil, @footballisamerica.com. All of those places, you can get a hold of us. Or you can just comment right on the website or our Facebook, facebook.com/footballisamerica podcast. All of those places are places you can go. You can tell us here how horrible we did, we should never talk to Brandon again. You can even, comment on the page that Brandon has for us and say, you know what? If you ever talk to these guys again, I'm going to find you and burn your servers. That's okay. That's stuff we need to know because if we don't know, then we can't ever fix it.
I don't need to know that. It's only crap Brandon needs to know. I mean, that's on him. But you can also find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, all those great things. Get on there, give us a listen, reject your decision, and then write a scathing review.
That is the norm that we get. So thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful evening, day, morning, workout, whatever it is you're doing, and we hope to get you back sometime.
Thank you for joining us.